Hi everyone, this is Katie. Just checking in with you. I had a few people request to make a terrarium video, so I'm going to show you how I make terrariums. I've had a couple of pretty successful terrariums. I have one in the office that has barely any light that has lasted almost 4 years now, so it's doing well, and I've been wanting to make terrariums. I have all the supplies for it, so might as well. Yeah, and I have nothing else to do today considering, I have a 5 a.m. flight and I haven't packed and I haven't unpacked from the last one, so let's make terrariums because I like to procrastinate and make my life hard. So let's start off what you're going to need. So first thing you're going to need is going to be a clear glass container. So it can have, you can have seen them in cookie jars, you can just use regular pickle jars, or in this case, I think my grandma had this and my dad gave it to me. So I have like 6 of these. So I guess I'm going to make a lot of terrariums, but they're pretty nice. But you need to make sure that it isn't tinted. Make sure it's completely clear so the light can get into the plants, because light is very important even for terrariums. So just be aware of that. Make sure it's not tinted at all. The next thing that you're going to need is going to be some pea gravel. So I got this pea gravel. I just got it in bulk from Menards, and I was buying pea gravel from Earl May, and it was just like 4 cups for $7, and then I saw that Earl May had this, and so it has some smaller rocks in it and a little bit of sand. Just rinse it out, then it will work. Don't rinse it out in the sink. You don't want to have rocks and sand in your sink. That won't be good. And so if you want to either get it from Earl May or from Menards or any other store that has pea gravel, just make sure it's not too small or too big, because if it is too small, that won't allow the water to seep in and drip into the gravel, and that's kind of the point, is to take away that excess moisture. If it's too small, it won't allow it to do that efficiently. Also, you don't want it to be too big, otherwise you're not going to have that layer. You're not going to be able to layer things on top of it. It's just going to fall through. It's not going to work effectively either. So you want to have just pea-size gravel, so like 1 to 1/2 inch size gravel there, or yeah, 1/2 inch, 1/4 inch gravel, whatever, just pea gravel, okay? Next up, you're gonna layer on top of that moss. So I have some sheet moss here that I got at Earl May as well, and I have it soaking in water. So I was soaking in water because it does come dry, and I don't want it to be completely dry when I put it into the terrarium. Otherwise, it's going to soak up any water that I put in, and I might either underwater or overwater the terrarium starting out, and I don't want to start off with that. So I just soak it in water, make sure it's damp, and then you'll see I'll wring it out when I make the terrariums. So it's not dripping wet, but it's not going to be dry at all. So I like to have this as a barrier layer between the rocks and the soil, so then the soil doesn't go into the rocks, and then eventually the rocks won't serve its purpose of gathering that excess water. So that's why I like to have kind of just a filter layer for it. The next thing that you're going to need is charcoal. So you're going to use horticulture charcoal. Don't use like grilling charcoal like we did when I was in high school and we had to clean water, and I was with a bunch of guys and they're like, oh hey, let's use some charcoal, I heard that's good. And then they went and got like grilling charcoal. Okay, that's not it. You don't want to use that. You're going to use horticulture charcoal. Okay, that's what you're going to use, not grilling charcoal. Still mad, still salty about that because I knew that's what we weren't supposed to use. Anyway, the soil that I'm going to be using is the African soil or African violet soil mix. You want to use appropriate soil for the plants that you're going to be using. I am going to be using an African violet as well as some moss, in this terrarium. Now, if you're going to be planting, let's say, succulents, or if you're going to be using orchids, anything like that, you want to make sure you're using the right soil type for them. Now, when you're choosing your plants, and that's next up, what we have here, when you're choosing your plants, you want to make sure you're getting plants that have the same needs. So like I have a small African violet. This is one of the seedlings that I had that I grew. And I have this is a peperomia, but I'm not going to be using this within the terrarium. I'm just going to have this as an example for the size that you want. You can have a pretty small plant. It doesn't have to be this small, but one that will fit into the container that isn't going to be crowding it, because you don't want to have a lot of crowding. You want it to actually grow into the container. So we don't want to stuff it in there and have it crammed. So I start with like pretty small plants, but then like I have my moss here. It has the same needs as the African violet, where it has, you want to have a lot of moisture. It likes to have the soil to be more moist.
It doesn't mind having wet feet as much, whereas
I wouldn't want to plant, say, moss with a succulent, because with succulents, when they get wet feet, they need to breathe a little bit, and they have different soil type needs. So we need to make sure you're not mixing different care for the plants that you're using within the terrariums. Last thing that I have is this tool quotations, because I just looked in my pantry and I was like, what can I use in order to like stamp things down and wipe things up and actually dig? Okay, this is just a wine cork on a fondue fork. Now, if you don't have that, too bad. You have to have exactly what this is. You have to find a fondue fork and a cork and use that. Okay, I'm kidding. You don't need to have this. You just need to have any pokey thing. Like I wanted to try this, and then in the past I've used like just a chopstick, and sometimes I'll tape a spoon to it to dig and stuff. Just something that you can reach down into the jar and reach the bottom of it. So it has to touch the bottom so you can actually do stuff with it. So you can invent stuff like this, which I'm hoping is going to work pretty well. We'll find out. But you don't have to get anything fancy. You don't have to get fancy with this. So just use what you have. All right. So now that we've gone through all of the items that we're going to need, let's start making this terrarium. I did miss one other thing. So I forgot to say that you're going to want to get a funnel or make a funnel like I made here. This is just an old pizza box that I rolled and taped together, but it's so you can, as long as you can fit it down into the jar, then as you're putting items in, it's not going to hit the sides, and it's going to place it exactly where you want. You don't want it to hit the sides. You can kind of direct the material as you're putting it into where you want it. But you don't want the opening to be too small. Otherwise, like the gravel, it'll start plugging it up. Or if you do put your plants in and put it, kind of act like a slide into the soil, then you can actually get them in there. You don't want to make it too small at the bottom. So you can always make it smaller and then like cut it so it's a wider opening. So I like to have it around 1 inch to 2 inches wide at least. Alrighty, let's get this party started. So the first thing that we're gonna need is we have our rocks. So we have our pea gravel here. I'm gonna add that in. It's okay. It fills everywhere. That's why your husband said you need a potting room, so you're not doing this shit in your kitchen. So doing this, and I like to have, just depending on the size of the terrarium, it to have about an inch or a half inch of gravel on the bottom. Now, if you do put in too much, you can always pour it out. It's not a problem, but just make sure it's even. So I like to kind of tap it down, or you can use your super high-tech tool here and actually, you know, move stuff around. I'm pretty proud of myself for thinking this, honestly. Like, come on. Who thinks of this shit? I do. I think of this. So next we're going to put in moss. So don't get your very nice funnel wet. But we're going to put in the moss. So with the moss, we don't need a funnel to do this. We just want to put an even layer. So you might need to tear it up a little bit and stretch it out to get an even layer on the top of the rocks. But I'm just going to, you know, shove it in and then use my tool here to kind of stomp it down. So it's even over the top. You know what? So now my cork thing isn't working. I need something sharper. I have prongs. Hell yeah. Go to your local thrift store and get you some fondue forks. Because this is awesome. This is genius. This is working so well. Wow, Katie. This is pretty impressive. Have that rock all covered. So you see we have the rock layer and now we have the moss. So the next layer that we're going to put on is some horticulture charcoal. So we're going to put on the horticulture charcoal. And I'm not going to put on a whole layer. I'm going to keep it pretty thin and sparse on top. So it is just to help with drainage and then also absorb any impurities that might get into the terrarium. So it will help just keep a natural balance within this since it's creating its own little ecosystem. So we're going to do that with the charcoal. Put that in. Use my funnel again. Get kind of a pile in there. I'm going to put the cork back onto my fondue fork. You know, push it around, make an even layer there. There we go. Okay, so you can kind of see how we have the charcoal layered in there now. So it's just a thin layer. I can still see some of the moss underneath it, so it doesn't have to be completely covered. Just a nice. I apologize for the angle change, but my phone died, and this is the only place that I can charge it. So we're gonna work through this. So we're going to next put in the swale. So with the swale, I did put water in it, so I soaked it, and you want to soak it enough where it's kind of still dry. Like when you squeeze it, when you lightly squeeze it, you shouldn't see any water coming out of it. That should be the right consistency. So you can just put in enough water that you're not going to have any of it's not going to be too wet or too dry. So, you know, just perfect. Make sure it's perfect. So next we're going to put it into the terrarium. So let me see if the angle is right. So I just like to use my funnel and kind of direct it to where I'd like to place it within the terrarium. So let's take a handful, kind of sprinkle some in there, shake it out, And then as I'm adding it, I want to put in about 3 inches worth in here. So I want to fill up just a little, about half of the jar. So I'm just gonna put some in there, and as I put it in, I might try to resituate it after a while so I can kind of estimate, see how much I have in there. A little bit more. That's about right. Let me show you here. So we have our soil layer in there now. And that looks pretty good. Pretty happy with that. So now what we have to do is we're going to put holes in the soil so then we can place our plants in them. So I'm just going to kind of dig a little hole and try to put the plant in there. We'll see how it goes. So let's try this. Okay, this is the best that I can do for angles that I can figure out. There's glare and I can't figure out how to get it to go away without it being completely dark in here. So we're gonna try this. So I'm just gonna use my super fancy cork tool here, and we're gonna kind of make a hole where I want to place the African violet. So the African violet, I want that to be the centerpiece in here. So I'm gonna put that kind of in the middle, maybe a little offset. And I'm gonna do about, let's see, just a 1/2 inch hole, because I know that African violet, I just repotted it from seed, and I know the roots aren't that big in there, so it has a pretty small pot. So we'll take a look and see what it looks like. All right. Ooh, those roots look good. Pretty happy with this. I'm just gonna just gently massage and tap out the soil, the excess soil. We won't need that. And then we're just going to plop him in there. Gonna boop. So he's booped down in there. And I'm just gonna try to scooch him over and then rebury him. Then I'm gonna tap lightly to get him to stay up, and I might need my chopstick. We're getting fancy now. Got a chopstick and the cork tool fondue thing. This works pretty well. So I'm just gonna make sure that the roots are buried. Kind of tamp it down a little, just a little bit. Don't be too aggressive. We don't want to cause compaction in here. It's gonna be hard to get it uncompacted. And when there's compaction, then that won't allow the soil or the water to penetrate. So we want to make sure that we're not packing it down too much. We want the water to still go through the soil, so it goes through the whole process and cycling within the terrarium. So we have our African violet in there now. So I'm going to get the moss. So I have our moss here now. And with this moss, you can see that, hopefully you can see on the back here, how it has some roots. Now with these roots, I'm actually going to cut some of these off and then place them around, so then those roots will take hold and in other areas of the terrarium. So I'm just going to take my scissors and do that quick. Okay, so I have some of my smaller pieces of moss, and I'm just going to place those down, root size down on the soil. So I'll go ahead and throw those in. Oh, I flipped over, of course. If you can find little cuttings like this, they work very well in terrariums because they have the humidity they need in order to root, and you're going to have a really good environment for them to establish themselves in. And since they're used to it, they'll do pretty well within the terrarium. One more piece here. And I don't like to crowd my terrariums too much because I know that they'll do pretty well, and when they do, then I know this moss will take off as soon as it establishes its roots. So I just like to keep it clean. Maybe I'll just cut off one more. I don't think I'm going to put the whole plant in there because that'll be too much. Okay, I think that's all of them I'm going to put in there. So I'll give you a better look of this. All right, once you have all of the plants in there, then we have to water it. Now, you don't want to overwater it. It's better to underwater it to start off with, and then if you think you need to add more later, then you can. Now, the way that I water it is I try to look at, you can see the water go down into the soil, and once it gets down to that moss layer, that tells me that that's about right. So, and not completely, you don't want to like completely flood it, but just a little bit. And you want to be as gentle as possible too. So I like using this watering container because it has a pretty long spout, so I can get down in there a little closer to the soil because I don't want to have splash back from the soil and have it splash on the sides. So I kind of pour it along the sides, and then for some of my other ones I might use a spray bottle, but I kind of just dribble it in there slightly and kind of just slowly distribute it. And if you do overwater it, if you do put too much, just make sure that just leave it open for a while and it will evaporate, and you don't have to, you're not going to ruin it. And as long as you don't like pour a whole jug in or something, just kind of slightly, just a little wet. So I think that's pretty good. I did create a hole in there with it. Probably should have used our spray bottle, but mine's upstairs and I'm lazy and I don't want to go up there right now. So I'm just going to push my moss back in there that came up and call it good. So let me show you kind of what it looks like from the top, and we'll be about done. All right, here is the final product. Now, your plants might look a little sad like my African violet does right now when they're first in there, because you just like stuffed them in there, but they'll perk up. I just give them a little time. The plants usually look like that when they are first repotted, but you can kind of see if I zoom in there. There's my African violet, and then my moss around it, just the little cuttings. So I will keep you updated. I will keep you updated on what this looks like in the next couple weeks, and we'll see how it comes up. Alright guys, that's all I got for you today, but if you have any questions, leave them down in the comments and I will answer those. If you have any suggestions for me, or if there's a different way that you make terrariums, let me know. I like to learn from everyone, so this is just the way that has worked for me in the past. If you have any tips or tricks, leave them down below. It'll help everyone else out, and I'll learn something too. But just let me know, and hit that subscribe button or give it a like if you liked it, or share with me if you make these terrariums. I'd love to see if you made a terrarium based off of this video, or if you have a terrarium. Freaking love terrariums. They're so interesting. So if you have a terrarium, just send it to me. I would love to see a picture of it. So you can send it to me on Instagram at Mossy Katie, or I think you can attach pictures and comments. I don't know, but I want to see your terrariums because I think they're really cool. They're just an established enclosed environment, and I think it's fascinating. So just let me know, you guys. Thanks for joining me. I'll see you next time.